I'm so happy to be here, and today we'll be talking about dynamic reteaming. And so I have prepared an introduction to dynamic reteaming for you, so let's get started. Okay. Many of us read books about how to get better at our work. And for example, this is one book. It's a great book, and I have it on my bookshelf at home. And a lot of the books that I've read over the years have said things like this: teams with stable membership perform better. So I would read books like that, and I'd be in organizations that changed a lot. And so I was curious about this. Other things like Tuckman's model for group development, maybe you have heard of this: forming, storming, norming, performing, adjoining. Very catchy, almost like a song. It implies, though, that it's easy. Keep your teams together, and ultimately they will perform. So I was curious about that also. Is it that easy? Forming, storming, norming, performing. Tuckman's model. And I like the idea. I think it would be wonderful. It would be an easy life if it were that easy. If time could make our teams high performing, and by keeping the teams together, maybe it's like magic. It would be great to have that as the result. Wouldn't it be great if we could just keep our teams together? I like the idea. But the reality is, I think, that often we are reteaming. So it means that someone is joining our team and someone is leaving our team. It happens. It's a thing. It's normal. It's a part of life that people come and people go. Reteaming. And when I thought about this more, I thought this: it only takes one person to change the team. Again, someone joins the company, or maybe someone leaves the company, and the team isn't the same anymore. The feeling is different. The dynamic of the team is different. It's really a new team whenever someone joins or someone leaves. So I'm curious about you. What is your experience? If you think about the last month, maybe raise your hand if someone has joined your team in the last month or left your team. Raise your hand. Okay, and you can look around in the room because you can see that it's a thing. People come and people go. I ask this question when I talk to people all over the world, and it's the same. It's really inevitable that our teams will change. So people come, people go, and I think we need to pay attention to that. We can use different techniques, and we can get better at reteaming. We can pay attention to it, and we can help the reteaming succeed. So it's really only a matter of time before your teams will change. So I want to say this though: I am not suggesting that you change your teams after this conference. That's not my message, okay? It's not the time to go change your teams, break them up. I'm not saying go switch your teams frequently. I'm not telling you that it's always the best idea to change the teams. And I'm not saying that it's easy to change the team. Because sometimes, even a small change, maybe at first it looks easy, but really in the end, it can bring up a lot of emotions. It can be hard, it can be challenging. So I'm not telling you the answer to your problems is to change your teams. But I do think it should be part of the discussion. It's something for all of us to think about. So I am here to say is, yeah, just like this sign, welcome to reality, it's natural and inevitable that our teams will change. People will come and go. So it's normal. In my experience, I have been in the software industry over 20 years now, mostly software as a service companies. I've been a part of several startups that grew bigger into public companies, or maybe they were acquired by other companies. And for example, one of the companies, I was the 15th employee, and I left when there were 800. Another one, I was the 10th employee, I left when there were 900. And as you can imagine, you go from one team to many teams, right? One of these, I was on the first team, and we grew to 25 teams. At another one, I was coaching 50 teams. So things change as you grow. And it's not just growth. I mean, it was also shrinking. But I will say, before all of that, I was a university professor. So I am a career changer. Maybe some of you also changed the career. So I was a university professor. I taught English for many years before. So I worked at these software companies after this. It's a little bit about me. So today, I train people and help people coach their teams that go through change. And yeah, I'm here from Los Angeles area. I live near there in a city called Thousand Oaks. So those are not oak trees. Those look like palm trees. But nonetheless, yes, California. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm very honored to be coming to Japan. Thank you for bringing me here. I'm really happy to be here. So in this talk, I will give you an introduction to dynamic reteaming and how to coach teams that grow bigger or shrink, because it's both. Sometimes the teams will grow, sometimes they will shrink. In the past 4 years or so, we see a lot of shrinking in companies. So we can help our companies as they go through this change. So here is how I'm organizing this talk. So first, we'll talk about the context of team change using an eco-cycle metaphor. Maybe you have heard of the eco-cycle before from a variety of books that we'll talk about. I will then talk about 5 patterns of dynamic reteaming. So how do the teams change? And what are specific things that we can do with our teams to help them succeed when they go through change? And then at the end, I'll talk about some overall guidelines and suggestions for helping your teams before they change, okay? So this is the organization of the talk. So let's get started. So part 1, the context of team change. So context or environment. So we will see that there is an eco-cycle. So some of you might have seen this eco-cycle from the wonderful book, Liberating Structures. In fact, I have it at the bottom, the reference at the bottom here. So let's talk about an eco-cycle in general, and then we will apply it to teams. So we'll talk about a little bit about nature, but believe me, it all relates. So first, let's talk about the beginning of something like an acorn from a tree is planted in the ground. If it does not thrive or succeed, maybe it goes into a poverty trap and the tree does not grow. But maybe it has enough water and sunlight, and it becomes a small tree. It's in adolescence. And then it could be that it grows and grows and becomes a mature tree, part of a forest. It's in maturity. Okay, this is a metaphor. This is all an eco-cycle metaphor. It also could be that maybe the tree has some problems. It doesn't have enough water. It doesn't have enough sun. It struggles to survive. Maybe it kind of stagnates. It's in a rigidity trap. The tree, maybe the tree is an apple tree and has fruit, but when it's in a rigidity trap, there's not fruit, or maybe only a little bit. And then something happens. It could be that there's lightning and there's a spark, and then it's in creative destruction. So the trees are in fire. And then what happens after is seeds come out and it starts again. It goes through the birth phase. So this is the general concept of an eco-cycle. It's like nature. Things age and change. Okay? And so I think our teams go through a similar process. For example, you'll have a new team that comes together, and it starts in the birth phase. It's a new team. And maybe the new team is growing, and it becomes a stronger team, and it becomes into maturity. It becomes a mature team. Maybe the team is performing. Maybe the team is delivering software that the customers love, and it's doing well. It could, though, maybe the team becomes too big. Sometimes companies hire a lot of people and put them on the team. So at first the team was smaller, and then it grew bigger, and then things get slower. It's more difficult to make decisions. It's like the team is in a rigidity trap. It's almost like stagnating, right? Like it's not delivering like it used to. It's not, maybe the people don't talk. It's awkward. Things are slow. It's hard to make decisions. The work is unrelated. And someone might say, maybe we should split the team. Maybe the team has a retrospective and they decide we would be more effective if we were two teams instead of one big team. So the team goes through a change, it goes through a transformation, it is in creative destruction. Let's split the team in half. And then what you have is the team is new again, but it's two teams. And then the cycle continues. So this is that general concept of eco-cycle. And that, it happens to be the grow and split pattern of dynamic reteaming. We'll talk about the 5 patterns later. But I like to illustrate that with just this concept that the teams just age and change. It's a natural occurrence, okay? They don't all split like this. Not always grow and split, maybe a different way. So we will see the other ways also. The other point is that the team change happens at different levels, okay? Person level, someone joins the team, someone leaves the team. Maybe a team change, the team splits, or maybe the team joins together. Team of teams at these larger levels. Maybe your company acquires another company so that they can have a new product faster. Companies like to do that. So these team changes happen at these different levels. And sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. So it could be, here's some examples. You know, someone joins or leaves the team, or someone switches teams. Maybe someone wants to work with other people. They switch teams in the company. Teams might merge together. So there's these different examples. Reorganizations are larger, usually. Maybe a centralized decision. So we have all of these different kinds of changes at these different dimensions. And that's essentially what I like to consider dynamic reteaming. It's team change at a lot of different dimensions or levels. And you might have different combinations of this. So why? Why do the teams change? I was curious about this because when I from the picture earlier, I was part of these different startups and they grew fast and they changed, but was it just a California experience? I became very curious about this, and then I interviewed people in the software industry around the world, and then I wrote the book, Dynamic Reteaming. So I asked people, share some examples of how your teams have changed in the past, and transcribed the data. I coded it for themes and then wrote about them. And these are some of the main reasons that teams change. So growth and attrition. Sometimes there's new work that happens. Maybe your company for 2024 has a new product idea. So there's new work, and maybe the teams change a bit to work on the new things. It could be that the teams change for deliberate sharing of knowledge, kind of to have redundancy. Maybe you have a critical system and more than one team should know how to support this critical system. Knowledge sharing. Stagnation in learning. We can help people build their careers by working with different people and on different things in the team. So I like that idea of people can learn new things if they change teams. And sometimes we get surprised by team change. Maybe something like COVID caused different changes in our companies and teams, and it was a surprise. Another reason not listed on here is sometimes there's a new leader that comes to the company, and then there's a change, or a lot of changes. And the new leader brings people that they like to work with. Wide variety. So these are some of the reasons why. But let's look at some specific things. So the 5 patterns of dynamic reteaming. So I did not know these patterns before I wrote this book. I had experienced things, but when I interviewed different people and I coded the data for themes, these are the patterns that emerge. I was curious, what is the nature of reteaming, of team change? And so it was very exciting for me to learn different stories from colleagues. And I like that sort of qualitative research approach. So it was a process of discovery, really, when I wrote this book. Sometimes people write a book and they write an outline and that's their book. And sometimes you discover your outline when you're writing. So that's what happened to me. I like that. So these are the 5 patterns. So there's 1 by 1, and we'll go into detail on each of these. So there's 1 by 1, someone joins a team, someone leaves a team or a company. Grow and split, the team grows bigger and it splits. It could split into 2 or more teams. Merging is the opposite. Teams join together. Isolation, we haven't talked about this one yet. A team is formed to the side and they have process freedom and they build something new. A beneficial silo. Sometimes we hear, no, the team should not work in a silo. Well, sometimes it's helpful. So that's isolation. We'll look at that. And then switching. Someone switches from one team to another. And there's different creative ways to do it. So let's dig in. So 1 by 1 is really, it sounds very easy. Someone joins the company or someone leaves. So there's a lot of things that you can do to help someone succeed when they join your company. It's the space of onboarding people and helping people feel like they belong. And there's also offboarding. Many of us have experienced that it's helpful to not be alone when you join a company. So working in pairs is something that I have experienced at numerous companies, and it helps people feel a sense of belonging when they join the team. So maybe they're pair programming. These people here in the picture are working together with one screen. Sometimes you can work with groups as well. And it helps people to not be the only person on the side alone when they join. also with, and there are stories in the book that talk about people beyond programming that work with a buddy or a pair when they're new. So it's helpful to work in a pair when you're onboarding someone. Now, this is an activity that I like to do with teams, and I learned it from Lisa Atkins. Many of you maybe met Lisa Atkins last year when she came here. So she came to Scrum Tokyo last year. So Lisa Atkins taught me this activity. It is from her book, Coaching Agile Teams. And I like this activity because you can do it with one team or you can do it with many teams. I've done it, I think, together with like almost 100 people. You can do varieties with this. But basically, when someone joins your company or your team, in this case, everyone can make a poster of what they want to share with each other on the team, such as their skills or their hobbies or things that they want to learn in the next month or what they offer to teach someone else. And when someone joins, I find it's a good reason to slow down and try to build the relationships, because it makes it easier when people have common ground and they celebrate, or maybe when they learn that they all have an interest in something. Maybe it's cooking, or maybe it's going on a hike, and then they will plan a team activity around this shared interest. We can also celebrate differences that we learn about through an activity like this. So you can do it online with Zoom or with like a whiteboard, or you can do it in person. This team was doing it in person. So one by one is joining the company or leaving. So when someone leaves, there's other activities you can do as well. And there is one activity that I learned from ORSC, Organizational Relationship Systems Coaching, which is written at the bottom there. So they have a concept that I have applied to teams that I've been on. I was working at a company, and that beautiful ocean view was outside the company building. And so we would go for a walk out there. And there was a product manager who, when the team would deliver something that the team was proud of and they accomplished their goal, they would go to that seaside cliff and they would scream. And that was the way that they would celebrate. And one day, this product manager left the company. He went and he started a new company. But this team was like, what do we do? He's leaving. We will have a new product manager, but I mean, it's not part of the formal job description to go scream outside. That's usually not the thing. But this team decided we will do that in his honor and to keep the tradition going. So one thing you can do when people leave the team or the company is think about what they did that is special that you want to continue doing. Maybe they brought a special food, or maybe they made a joke, or maybe they screamed on the side. But this is one thing that you can do to kind of acknowledge the departure. And so again, we are building software, we are delivering software, but there's a lot of changes on the people layer. So we can do things to acknowledge it and to help the changes happen. These are like mini team transformations. And one other thing about the one by one is sometimes it sounds like simple. Oh, it's only one person. But it could, depending on who the person is, it could be really challenging and really difficult when someone leaves. Or maybe if someone joins and maybe you don't like that idea, it could be hard for you. Like there are a lot of human factors related to people joining and leaving teams. So the next pattern, second pattern, is grow and split. So this could be that the team feels like it has grown too big and then someone splits it into 2 or more teams. But why? Why would we do that? Well, Someone let it grow big. Maybe it was a deliberate choice that the team grew big. Maybe it's the first team in a company and the hiring happened and then they were splitting into multiple teams. It could be the first ever team at a company, or it could be as part of a larger company. But why split? So when the team gets too big, sometimes we forget facilitation, I think. It's another solution. If you don't want to split a team, you can facilitate the team differently. That's another way to attempt the problem. So sometimes you might notice that we have a planning meeting. It used to be 30 minutes, but now it's 90 minutes because there's a lot of different voices and a lot of different people communicating. It could also be the pattern where there's a lot of silence and only 2 people talk. That happens sometimes when teams grow pretty big. It could be that decisions are harder to make, or coming to a consensus on some decisions is more difficult with 15 people. But when it's 8 people, it's easier. It's just less people. The work could also become unrelated. So maybe the stand-up meeting gets really big, and you're hearing the updates from the stand-up, but maybe you want different sprint goals or different ideas for the work. Just naturally kind of diverges. There's so many people. And so it can also be a deliberate strategy. Maybe you have a company and they work in a certain way, but you want them to work differently. So maybe there's a new team and they work with some new methods. Maybe they're Scrum. This is a Scrum gathering. So maybe they're Scrum methods that you want the teams to try. And then maybe more people are learning and they join the team and they're pairing and that team gets bigger. And then when you split the team, 2 teams know the Scrum or have a good start because they're learning from each other. It could be a deliberate strategy to grow and split, to spread process ideas. People do that. It can also be part of an onboarding strategy so that it's the same core concept. The teams align on the work, on how they work, and then they split. So you could do this on purpose. Some people like to. With a lot of these patterns, you can do them deliberately, usually with a good reason, like a problem to solve, or then sometimes they just happen, like things evolve. If you want to split the team, so there are things that you can do kind of before, during, and after. There are a lot of words on this slide, but you can decide who goes on which team. Teams will have maybe a retrospective and discuss, we think we should split, here's how. Which people will go on each team? The other challenge with splitting teams is, will there be any team members that are shared between the 2 teams? Maybe there's only one product manager and suddenly 2 teams. It's a new challenge. With a lot of the team evolution that happens in our companies, it's a lot of problem trading. It's a lot of trading of problems. There's no magic solution to anything. I wish there was sometimes, but we try, we learn. Are there any shared team members? What will we own? If you have one team and it splits into 2, who owns what? What is the mission of team A? What is the mission of team B? And what do they own? Sometimes teams make a timeline. We don't want to, what is called, drag out the split. We want to, if the team decides to split, you want to do it. You want to do it according to a calendar and plan it. Yeah, what are the implications to the code? When will we meet? A lot of the times when team splits into 2 or more, it means new calendar invites, new Slack. There's overhead, right? But these are some tactics you can do before. You can do some planning. I was at one company and we grew from 1 team to 25 teams when I was there. We would have a checklist because this happened a lot of the time. It was part of our growth strategy. The company was Appfolio. That's actually a picture from Appfolio. That's one of the teams I worked with. So after the team split, you can celebrate and acknowledge the ending. This is a picture from a software company. It's a picture of a cake at Unruly Software in London. There's a story in my book, Dynamic Reteaming, from Rachel Davies, who I saw was a speaker at a Scrum Tokyo gathering in the past, Rachel Davies. So she shared the story about how at Unruly Software, when their first team split, they had a celebration with a cake, and it was a Lord of the Rings inspired cake, and they called it the splitting of the fellowship. So you can have fun with the changes in your teams. And it's also a good time to share gratitude and appreciation for the team. Because it's always a good practice to thank our team members for their contributions and appreciate working with them. Because you will probably work together again. I think that in my experience, there's, again, a lot of splits and changes to teams can come out during retrospectives. I think this was one thing that was missing from some Scrum that, I'm a CSP from years ago. I was trained by Ken Schwaber. One of the things that I think was missing was the idea of shifting team compositions. Somehow that didn't make it into the conversation. It's a lever that we can move to try to become a more effective team. So maybe this is a team having a fishbowl retrospective. Maybe they can talk about this. Are there any changes to our team's composition that we can consider making? And I like this idea of what is the voice of the team? Because the team is closest to the work. The teams have ideas for how they want to do their work. Each team does not have to operate exactly the same. I found that in my experience as well. And I think it's very respectful for the team entity to have some agency and choice in how they organize. I love that idea. All right, third pattern, the merging pattern. So this is really the opposite of the grow and split. So grow and split, very common when a company is growing bigger. When a company is shrinking or changing like that, you see more merging, more consolidation of teams and efforts. Maybe different work is on pause. And sometimes people leave the teams. It's not, none of this stuff is perfect. None of this stuff, it's stories of happiness and stories of sadness sometimes when reteaming happens. There's a lot of people factors to this whole topic. So 2 or more teams join together to become a bigger team. That's merging. Or maybe the team that results isn't that big because it was part of a larger change at the company, like some sort of reorg or layoff. All right, so why would you merge teams together? What are some of the reasons? So one of them that I've seen become more and more common over the last, 5, 8 years is that specialists have evolved on our teams, right? Front-end engineers, back-end engineers, data engineers, all sorts of different specialists, iOS engineers, Android engineers. Sometimes if you want a cross-functional team, you don't have all the specialists to have perfect, small, cross-functional teams like they told us originally in things like the Scrum Guide, right? The industry shifted, the technology has become more complex, we have more specialists. And what I've noticed is that, and there's cross-team dependencies as well. If you put the people together, they can figure out how to organize, and maybe it helps when you have one specialist and more people that need the work of the specialist, they can decide how they operate together. It's a different way to tackle dependencies. It could also be that teams merge together so they have greater pair programming variety. There's a story in my book from a company in New Zealand, TradeMe, there's an engineering manager at the company Trade Me named William Them. I interviewed him for my book. And he would combine teams so that the team members could pair program and then switch pairs, but have a greater variety in who they paired with. So they had a different kind of reteaming, which was a larger group of people that would pair and switch pairs. Maybe they would switch pairs every few days, something like that. It could also be that teams merge together because we want to create smaller kind of startups within our company where we coach the teams to organize themselves. It does take coaching, but this could happen as well. It could be also that the company had a layoff, there were departures, and so operations get consolidated. An activity that I love to do, this is probably my favorite activity, and I'm happy to send you the instructions step by step. It's in my book, but I got to make this like open source or something. So there's this activity called Story of Our Team. So in this picture are two teams that have merged together. And they were from a company I worked with in California called Procore. And with the Story of Our Team activity, one thing you can do with teams that join together is you can help them develop a shared history. Each of the teams makes a timeline, and each person stands in the order in which they join the team. And they write on the timeline their name and the date that they joined the team. And so you have this history of the team. And then they get together with the person next to them, and they write on the timeline their accomplishments, what they're proud of as a team. And they put that on the timeline. And then they talk. They share the story of our team, and then you can record it with your phone. And what this does is it gives the team a sense of shared history. Otherwise, they don't know. And maybe they have things in common and other things. So it just really helps the change move forward. This takes 1 hour to do. You can do it in person. You can do it, I've done it with 60 people in one room. You can do it with a whiteboard, like a Miro or Mural. You could do it with a PowerPoint slide deck. It doesn't have to be fancy. So the teams have it. You can, if your company acquires another company and you have new team members from a different company, if you can hear what they're proud of, what they built before, the other thing that it does is it raises the positivity and it reduces the fear of the situation, because you see that, we appreciate each other. It's just a great thing to do. And so Story of Our Team is that activity. So the other thing that you can do is, and I said this before, when the teams grow bigger, you can help them to organize. Some teams can do this easily. Some teams want to merge with other teams, and suddenly they're a team of 15, and they know exactly how they want to organize their work, and they feel this sense of freedom to do it. And they work out their communication pattern outside their team, and they're in it together. Other teams want to do this but need more help, so it's helpful to have a default pattern for how to organize. For example, I have an example here. At one company I was at, we had multiple teams, and some of them joined together because we wanted one shared backlog. We wanted to be sure that we were working on the most important elements, and having the teams separate, it got the sense that it just wasn't working. We joined together, they had one backlog that they managed, and they formed their teams, and then when the team finished the work, they worked on something else from the backlog. So sometimes the teams can do this by choosing their own team, like self-selection within the larger team. And there's some teams doing it with a concept called open space. So these are 2 books that help when you have larger teams. I love these books. How many of you have read these 2 books? Maybe some of you. Yeah. So the book on the left, The Surprising Power of Liberating Structures, you can go to liberatingstructures.com as well. There are different facilitation patterns. Well, they're more than that. They're more than facilitation. They help transform your organization if you use some of their tactics. I don't want to minimize it, but you can also learn some really cool, scalable facilitation tactics to use with your teams. Surprising Power of Liberating Structures. And the one on the right, Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. This is a book by Sam Kainer and several other people. These are both collaborative authorships. So the Facilitator's Guide has some other really cool guidelines about the nature of gathering people together to accomplish shared goals. So these books I would study if you want to learn different ways of working with teams, especially the bigger teams. All right, isolation pattern, 4th pattern. So the structure of this change is that you can form a team off to the side, and it's very important that this team gets to operate differently from the other teams. The team needs this process freedom to work in a different way than all the other teams. So let's look into this one. It could be that the team gets there's this isolated team, they're solving an emergency, and then they go back to the teams. It's natural. There's a production incident. The team forms, they do the work, takes them a little bit of time, and they go back to the teams. It's good for emergencies. I didn't make this up. Like, I just wrote it down, right? Like, this thing has been happening for years, so we'll look at some examples. It could also be that we want to have a separate team to develop a new product because we want to work differently than the other teams at a different cadence. So reasons, yeah. So freedom, focus, and speed. When you form a team and they're away from the other teams, they have a greater sense of like focus, maybe less distraction. Maybe they don't have to go to scrum of scrums from this team over here. Maybe they get to operate independently. Maybe they don't have to follow the same rules. These are like beneficial silos. Some people say, don't have teams in a silo. Well, sometimes it's helpful. So we'll see a little bit more about that. Okay, a couple case studies. This is a company in Santa Barbara that I worked with called AppFolio. So this company called SecureDocs, it was just acquired by another company in 2022. The story of AppFolio, so the first teams at AppFolio, we built software for property managers. So software like if you own 10 apartment buildings, you could use our software to manage all of the things about your apartment buildings. But the vision of the company was a lot bigger than that. And so it was time to build a new product. And our founder decided that we would start a team and we would put the team off to the side and we would give the team process freedom. He didn't say this in these exact words, but I was not a part of this team. And I saw this team. They were across the room and I wanted to be on that team. It's a downside. There's, it's a little bit of elite to be on this team was like, wow, right? So this team needed to do some discovery. They knew that they were going to build a place to store documents that was secure. This is SecureDocs is the company name. And they were working, all these team members were on other teams. They were building property management software. And they were using 2-week sprints, right? And it was very, very much what a lot of the teams did. They operated in more or less, agile Scrum kind of way. But this team felt like that was too slow to work in 2-week sprints. And if they had to go to stand up and talk about property management, it felt too different. So if we could form a new team and work at a faster, they wanted daily sprints. They wanted a quicker cadence. And so some of the ways of working of these other teams was just not appropriate for their goals and for their needs. It wasn't that it was bad. No, it was fine. It was working for those other teams. Those are different teams. But to give this team the ability to work with faster iterations, daily sprints, to develop something brand new, it worked very well. So our founder told us, don't bother them. Do not bring them into your meetings. Do not require that they do the same things. They had this process freedom. And it was really cool. They did work in a Kanban style iteration. They did what they wanted, and they communicated about what they were doing. That's the key to any of the process freedom stuff. People need to know what you're doing. You have to manage up. You always have to manage up. It's not all grassroots. But anyway, they became, what this one did, they became this team off to the side, and then it became a division. More people were added for only secure docs. And then before this company went public, they decided, we will split this out into a separate company. And it became like it just became a separate entity. And then it grew from there, and then it was just acquired in 2022. It was a very successful way to start something new in an existing enterprise. McDonald's also has isolated teams. Who's a fan of the Chicken McNugget? I am too. I love a Chicken McNugget, right? There is in the history of McDonald's, and you can read about the Chicken McNugget SWAT team. I was reading a book, and it's referenced at the bottom. It's an old book, 1989. It's a book called Teamwork. And I have it on my shelf at home, and I was reading this book, and I was looking, and then I learned that the Chicken McNugget was failing in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was failing in the market. People weren't buying it. There were problems with the product. And what happened was they brought a consultant in. They had the consultant had a very small team. They reported up to a decision maker. They actually worked in a different location than the other product development teams at McDonald's from that time. And they worked in a separate plant, and they saved the Chicken McNugget. So we have that today. But it was this small, isolated team, and they had the decision-making freedom apart from the bureaucracy of the other teams. They got to report up to one of the executives at the company, and they were given this autonomy. And it's kind of a cool story, and they have stories about it on McDonald's website. I think they called it the Chicken McNugget SWAT team. So when I read that, I was like, yeah. So it was a beneficial silo as well. So some general tactics for isolation. This is a room from an isolated team at Procore back years ago. One of the companies I worked at, Procore, the one that was near the cliff where the product manager screamed off the side of the cliff, that was this company. They had an isolated team, and they just worked in this conference room, and they had all their plans and everything like that. So they were in a different location. Other teams left them alone, and they were free to work in different ways. Those are some of the general tactics. So. All right, switching pattern. So the last pattern is the switching pattern. Now, you might look at this and say, gosh, it's very similar to that one-by-one pattern that you talked about at the beginning. And it's true. But the reason that I made it a separate pattern is because of its connection with fulfillment and for spreading knowledge deliberately. So we'll talk about that. So one by one is usually people join a company, people leave a company. So a lot of onboarding stuff. Switching pattern is a little bit different because I think it's about connecting to what you're passionate about and growing your career in your company and helping other people do that. and then building redundancy. So we'll get into it. So learning and fulfillment. We are delighted to have, I am very happy to see Woody Zuhl here from Hunter Industries originally. And Woody, I think, is speaking maybe tomorrow. And this is a picture of, I was also happy to see earlier today, there was a picture of Chris Lucian on the screen. And Chris Lucian was a speaker at this conference a few years ago, or I don't remember what year exactly. I interviewed Chris in Dynamic Reteaming. There are stories about Hunter Industries and Dynamic Reteaming. And one of the stories that Chris told me was this, so they worked in groups, right? They worked in these ensembles or mobs or groups of people. And one of the stories that he told me was that, I was like, well, can you tell me some stories about how your teams change? And he said, well, one of the things that they do is if someone wants to move from one team to another, they talk about it together, and then they let me know that the change is happening. And I was like, wow, okay, so Chris is at the time of the book, Chris was the leader of all the people. He was the head director of the software teams in this part of Hunter Industries, who manufacture sprinkler systems, and among other products. And I said, oh, you let the teams decide when they change? And he said, yes. And I said, well, how come? Like, where did that come from? And he said, well, we had a retrospective across our multiple teams. And the teams decided that sometimes they want to work with different people, maybe learn something different. And I like that idea. And so they work it out together, and then they tell me when they had some of the team changes. And I thought, wow, that was really cool. And so this, and getting back to the beginning of my talk, when we're looking at the traditional wisdom in some of the books about teams, the teams must stay the same so they perform. That perspective, to me as a human, I feel like it misses out on some of the delightful things that can happen in our workplaces. I mean, I like the idea of working at a place where I can learn and grow and collaborate with different people. So, we can still do great work if we have some choice and agency. And so this is one example of how they did that at Hunter Industries. It's like, it's great to be able to learn and grow. These are our lives, and we're here with the people, and it's sometimes it's nice to have variety. And also, it's nice to have the choice to not do this, to stay in the team that you're with. So you don't always have to change. I mean, don't get me wrong there. But sometimes you might want to. So another reason for the switching pattern and why it happens is sometimes also strategically, if you want to spread information to more than one team or within a team, you can do that with the switching pattern. Have you ever had the experience when someone left your company and so much of the information left with them? We would say, oh, all of the secrets to building the software were in their head, and then they left the company. It can be really challenging when that happens. It can be painful. So sometimes people want to pair or to work in the groups so that they spread the information. I also saw that Richard Sheridan was a former speaker at this conference in the past. I also, coincidentally, interviewed Richard Sheridan in Dynamic Reteaming. So Richard Sheridan, part of Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Menlo Innovations, they built their company. Richard and his co-founder built the company so that people work together in pairs and switch pairs, so that they can share information and build in some safety and redundancy. So then if somebody leaves, or if someone wants to work on something different, they're not kind of stuck. And so it just helps us build these structures. So we want more than one team to know a system, especially these days. Some people might think, oh, it's so expensive if more people work on one system. But I think it's helpful, especially on your critical systems, because of the rate of change in companies these days. So I like the metaphor of a tree. We want the teams to be strong like a tree, and it will have wind, it will have snow and rain, but the tree will stay strong. I love that metaphor. The other thing you can do with switching is share opportunities with people to switch teams. If you have people in your company and you want to retain them in your company, you want them to stay, you can help them build their career by telling them these are different opportunities or open hiring for other teams. And then if somebody sees it, it could be online, this team was in person, then maybe they would say, I'm interested in contributing here. Who should I talk to? Like, you share the instructions. I think that it helps your organization become a bit stickier too if you share opportunities to switch. This is another case study. So Procore Technologies, again, that company they're in California, in Carpinteria. They build software for construction industry, building the buildings, for example. So Procore developed a program they called nomading. These are the engineers that were in charge of the nomading program. This emerged when we did an open space conference within the company. So there were about 50 teams. So I was one coach for 50 teams. And these, one of the things that emerged in our onsite was that people wanted more, they called it cross-squad pollination. You know, like a bee that goes from flower to flower. They wanted the teams to spread the information, to share the information with each other. So these engineers developed a program where if you were interested in switching to a different team, these engineers had a list. It was in a spreadsheet. These are the teams that are willing to accept someone into the team for 2 weeks. So they would help their team members go to the team for 2 weeks, and then they would go back to their team. But some people went to the team for 2 weeks, and they decided, I would love to stay at this team. How do I do that? And then they talked to the managers and everything like that. But this was one program that enabled switching among 50 teams. So it helped people share information, and it also, in some cases, provided people with a chance to try out a different team. So this was a cool program, I think. I don't know if they still do it today. This was a few years ago. That's the thing, right? Like, today is a snapshot of your teams. It'll be different next year. I mean, these things age and change. People come and go. So we have to appreciate what we have. So I went over 5 patterns of dynamic reteaming. These are the structural patterns: one by one, grow and split, merging, switching, and isolation. Sometimes when you have a lot of the team changes happening, and you notice that that's what I mean by dynamic reteaming. It's not just one of these things. You might have different combinations. Dynamic reteaming. So some overall tactics for coaching teams through change. So I've said in this talk many times that it's inevitable that our teams will change. It's part of nature. They just do. People come and go. So what can we do in our companies to make it easier? Just overall, like beyond the team. So some team changes feel good. Sometimes we like the change, and sometimes we don't know. We don't like it. We feel uncomfortable. So I care about this human layer of software development. This is what I keep talking about. It's like we come and we work and we build the products and we build the team and all of that, but we're also human and we have feelings. So I think just realizing that some changes are scary, some are exciting, and we're all different, I think is the message I want to get across. So we need to normalize that people adapt at different rates to reteaming. So remember this eco-cycle from the beginning? Here's a simplified version. So there's an ending, like creative destruction in the previous slide. You know, maybe the team, this is the space of dynamic reteaming, of the reteaming patterns, the endings. It's the change of the team, it's the ending. The team splits in half. Well, getting to the new beginning is a bumpy ride sometimes. If you want the change and you like it, maybe you're suddenly in the new beginning. Maybe it was your idea to switch from one team to another. Sometimes we have changes and it's not our idea and we don't like it. I've experienced many of those. Heidi, go work over there. Okay, I didn't want to, but I did. You know, sometimes we don't get to choose, but sometimes we do. So, but the thing is here is it's invisible. If somebody's going to change it, you know, accepting the change, sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't, and it's invisible. So knowing that, you know, I talk about this with teams and at companies. We talk about it. One other so talking about the change as normal is one of the tactics. Another one is here, including people in the design of the future change. Sometimes you can. This is a case study from a company, and what happened was they had about 80 people in 2 clusters of teams. They had teams of teams. And they had hiring plans, and they knew they were going to grow, and it felt like they want 3 teams of teams, divisions, instead of 2. So there was an office in the back, and some engineering directors, myself included, we went and we were talking about, okay, we're going to hire 10 people. How are we going to do this? What will they work on? Where will they go? And we started drawing on whiteboards what the future team structure would look like. And you can see that it's whiteboards. And then one day, we were talking about this for a long time. Felt like forever. Maybe a few weeks. And we rolled out the whiteboards into the common area. And I remember that day because I was afraid. I was scared. What will the people think? What will the teams think? We were in this back office making the future team structure. What will the people think? But we wanted to include them. We wanted to include the team members in the decision of what the teams would look like in the future. So we rolled these out and we had different meetings in front of these whiteboards. And you know what we learned? We had mistakes. We had one team was over here, and we learned that it's better for the team to be over here. And how did we know that? Because one of the software engineers told us and convinced us we need to make a change. We got different voices included in the next step. That's really the heart of what Keith McCandless talks about with liberating structures. Include the people in the next step, in determining the next step. Now, this was, you could call this a reorg. It was about 80 people. It was pretty big. But we had the ability and we had the patience as leaders and the energy to slow down and say, what do you think? And we were humbled because, you know, again, it was scary to do this, but we learned that we made some mistakes and we could change our structure to be more successful as a whole company, as a whole department. We were inspired by Christian Linwall from Spotify, who told me a story about a similar structure. Now, there's other things you can do with maybe having an event, self-selection event. It's even a more open way to reteam. Sandy Momoli wrote a book with David Mole called Creating Great Teams. They talk about self-selection events, which is it's more open than this structure. Because this structure we had, here's the example of the future, what do you think? But you can do it in a more interactive way, but we didn't want to do that. We were not comfortable with that. We liked this way. So there's no perfect way for this stuff. Who are the people together? What's the problem you're going to solve and how are you going to do it? That's essentially what you do when you're planning some big changes. And big changes are difficult to make. Like, it's easier to evolve and change gradually, but we needed to do this for some reason. So we had an FAQ, we had various tactics to help this succeed. Leaders need to have patience. That's the other thing. We could have easily said, here's the new teams, they start on Monday, go for it, and then deal with the problems that happened. But we decided to try to increase the ownership over the change. So encouraging teams to solve problems is another one of the general tactics. You can have an open space event or a conference like this where the people try to solve a problem and they come up with the conference proceedings. Open space events with larger groups of teams can help identify and help people find shared causes or shared process improvements that they want to do across teams. That example from before of the nomading program came out of this particular open space conference. So people suggest ways to solve organizational challenges during open space. Building community across teams. So you can have different programs where people get to know each other, and then later when they switch teams, they're not strangers. So if you like the idea of forming, storming, norming, people just building relationships, you can do it across larger groups of teams. And then later, when your organization morphs and changes, the people are not strangers to each other. They don't have to be best friends, but they don't have to be strangers. So yeah, teams can push through obstacles together. We hire smart people to build software to solve problems for our customers, but they can also solve some of the organizational challenges and the people layer challenges that we have if we encourage them and invite them. They can push through obstacles together. So yeah, reteaming is inevitable. You might as well get good at it. Don't forget to focus on the people layer. We do need to build the software, delight people, but we're also human. Include people in decisions if you can. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed this talk. And please talk with me. I'm here at the conference. I would love to talk with you and learn about what all of you are doing. And you can connect with me as well. I have a newsletter, a periodic newsletter too. So cool, thank you very much. And I think we have questions maybe sometimes. So question and answer period, so. Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, yes, you have a question?
Okay, so thank you so much for your talk. It was very interesting. And even before I came here and heard you speak, looking at your proposal or your conf engine summary, I was really curious about what I can do as a person that is not in the authority to actually execute the reteaming or like change the teams. So I'm kind of in a place where I'm sort of a team leader, but I'm sort of also a team member, and I don't really have the control over the team structures and whatnot. But do you think, is there anything I could do so in such a way that I can encourage or maybe at least bring up the discussion about reteaming in my organization as someone who doesn't have the power to do so?
ここから中国通訳になりますので、逐次に入りますので、ステスさんお願いします。
はい、聞こえますでしょうか。
はい、聞こえてます。大丈夫です。
Yeah, this is the interpreting of the question into Japanese for the audience's benefit. Please stand by. 本日の、ご講演ありがとうございました。大変興味深い内容でした。実は、今回、その基調講演に来る前から、お話を聞く前、実は、コンファレンスエンジンのサマリーを見て、思ったんです。私一人としては、実は今所属しているところでは権限がないため、リチーミング、あるいはチームの編成替えなどについて、特に権限を持ってアクションを起こせません。今、チームリーダー兼メンバーの立場です。そういう意味でチームの編成の権限がないのですが、どのようにして、例えば会社でリチーミングのテーマを持ち出したり、あるいは編成外について促したりすることができるでしょうか。
Yeah, so the question is about how do I influence to get others to be willing to try team changes and other things as someone that doesn't have the decision-making authority over the teams that change. And I think that for this, sometimes, so whenever a team change happens or you want it to happen, it's very helpful to anchor to a problem, like why? That's one of the reasons I put the why slides with the patterns in my talk. The ones that say, well, why grow and split? Why merging? Why switching? It's because some of the answers are contextual. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? And talking with your team members, talking with the managers, I don't know how the dynamics work exactly with like the authority or hierarchy or decision making, but I would think like one, talking with your teammates about the problem you're trying to solve and what are some proposed solutions. Maybe there's some pro and con for 3 solutions. Like we're let's say we want to split. Like, well, one thing we could do is split the team. Here's some pros for splitting, here's some cons. We could also try to facilitate differently in our meetings. Here's some pros, here's some cons. So getting consensus with the team about a change, I think, is helpful because it's usually stronger to do it together with others than alone. And then also, it could be that maybe you notice a challenge in a different area and you could try to approach it with curiosity. Say, I've heard that it's helpful to merge teams when there aren't enough specialists or when you have a lot of dependencies between 2 teams. And take a look at this YouTube video, right? Like you can show examples of other teams. So you could come with curiosity like, I see that this is happening. This is a possible solution. What do you think? So I think, consensus, coming with curiosity, not going it alone, trying it with others could be helpful. Having someone we had another way to influence is maybe there's one team.
Sorry, could you cut the answer there? You're going for about 2 pages now.
Yeah, it's kind of long.
ちょっと分けて通訳させてください。ちょっと待ってください。はい、今の質問の内容は基本的にはですね、どうやって権限がない人として影響を及ぼしてですね、組織の改変というか、チームの編成替えなどについて伝えていけるかどうかということだと思うんですけれども、この場合、どうしてそのチーム替えが起こす必要があるのか、あるいは何を望んでいるかというところから、この why、なぜというところから入ったらどうでしょうかね。そういうなぜパターンというものもスライドに載っていたと思います。そしてもう一つは解決したい問題についてきちんとさせることですね。また皆様の方の決定権がどういうふうに会社の中でアレンジされているかわかりませんけれども、マネージャーの皆さんやメンバーの皆さんと話し合っていくことができるかどうか。そして解決策を提案として例えば3つ出していく。プロコンみたいな感じですね。と一例にはなりますけれども、チームの分割を望んでいるとして、 としては分け方を考えて、それぞれプロコンを出す。あるいは、今のチームの進め方について、ファシリテーションのことですね。プロコンを出して、そして、自分だけでなく、複数の人間で、相違を取っていく。これコンセンサスと英語で言ってますよね。そうすれば自分だけではなく何人か仲間が増えた形でもう少し強い声になります。また、別の課題を好奇心を持ってですね、見ていく方法があります。例えば、今度は分割ではなくて、マージの場合ですね。チームの中にスペシャリストが足りない、あるいはチーム間の依存関係が多いのであれば、その場合は両方のチームを合わせてしまった方がいいんですよ。知ってますっていうような持ちかけ方をして、それに関する YouTube のビデオをさらっと紹介する感じですね。このような形で、ちょっとまとめていくと、まずどのような可能性があるのかを探って、そして、自分の関心のあるところ、あるいはその好奇心を使ってですね、自分として興味のあるところを調べていって、そして自分一人から複数の人間を巻き込んでいくというような順番でまず進めていくというアイデアがあります。Please continue.
The translation allows time to think. I'm going to try to bottom line better.
And hopefully you realize that I used...
That went on and on, so thank you for the feedback.
Hopefully you realize that was equal time on your answer.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The other thing I was going to say is convince the decision maker to let your team experiment and report on the results. So sometimes if you want to change something, anything, the team, a way of working, one team experiments, then they do a presentation, and then sometimes other people might want to try, and that's another way to spread ideas. So.
もう一つだけまとめて言っておきますとですね、決裁者に実験することを認めてもらうということですね。こういうふうにとりあえずやってみる。で、結果を持ってどうだったか発表する。仕事の進め方に関して試していくということですね。でその、発表したことによって他の人も試してみたくなるかもしれませんし、そこから普及していく可能性もあります。
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
オンラインからでもご質問を受け付けますので、声を突然出していただいて大丈夫です。
Hello, Heidi. I'm very thankful to have heard about reteaming, and it's a very important topic for my company right now because we're doing a lot of teamings. My question is, in all the case study that you did, you only mentioned about like teaming with IT departments, I mean, Scrum teams. But I would like to know if there had been any ideas or insight that you got in terms of how to deal with the business side, because our problem right now in my company is IT has been trying to be very Scrum, but our Agile, I mean, but our business, for some reason, they keep on being very waterfall, and it's kind of a big challenge for us to kind of let them grow with us. They always think that business is very fast-paced, and they have to always carry out the result no matter how, even if that way of doing things is not the most efficient. Yeah. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございます。今日のリティーミングについてのお話ありがとうございました。私は聞いてとても嬉しく思っております。と申しますのも、今、会社の中でたくさんのチーム編成について取り組んでいる最中なんですね。そして、私の会社の場合は IT の方は、すいません。IT やスクラムチームの編成についていろいろ話されたようですけども、ビジネスサイドはどのように取り組んだらよいですかというのが私の質問になります。 実は、私の会社では IT の方はかなりスクラム、アジャイルよりに、チーム編成として、どんどん進めてきている中である一方、ビジネスサイドは、依然としてウォーターフォール形式の仕組みで進んできていて、私ども IT 側の方、私どもビジネスサイドの方で言うと、それぞれについて、ある程度その成長路線にズレが生じてきていて、苦慮する状況が発生しています。ビジネスサイドは、とにかく是が非でも、結果を急いで出す。ということで、ウォーターフォールの方の形で、どうしても、とにかく早く仕事を進めていかないといけないというところに、迫られているようなんですけども、どうしたらよいでしょうか。
Sometimes it can feel like we're very separate from the business side, and I would encourage you and your team members to understand the pressures that the business side is under. It sounds like very separate. So if you meet one-on-one with different people and understand what are their delivery pressures, I think you can find a way to help them succeed while you're also succeeding. So I think it's a matter of building these relationships so you succeed together, so it's not so separate. That would be a place to start.
I'm sorry, I froze, the Zoom froze the last 10 seconds about building the relationships. And can you finish, please, again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so let me try to say that again.
No, yeah.
Or similar, you know, I was trying to be really articulate. So I think that sometimes it can feel like we're very separate, engineering and business side, or IT and the business side. And we have pressures, but they also have pressures. So how can we get to know them so we can understand their pressures so we can help them succeed? We need to succeed together and have we need to come together more with building that relationship. I have empathy for them, you know, so it's how can you have empathy for them?
Got it. そうですね。時々私ども IT 側にいるとビジネスからかなり遠ざかっている状況で仕事をしている可能性があります。その場合にはビジネスサイドの感じているプレッシャーを、IT 側でも感じないといけないのではないでしょうか。1対1でビジネスサイドの人と会って、どのようなデリバリーのプレッシャーを感じているか知るということも一つのアイデアです。要するに、どうやったらビジネスサイドは成功を収めることができるのかを知ることによって、IT 側も成果を上げていく。関係づくりをして、互いのことを知って、一緒に成果を上げていくということを、共感を持つということですね。そして団結して、手柄を得るということです。どうでしょうか。
This, by the way, is a similar challenge that happens to many executives. An executive from one business unit doesn't understand the pressures of an executive at another business unit, but they need to operate more as a team. And so getting to know the pressures of the other person can help you find a way to succeed together. So it happens at executive level, and it also happens between departments. This is the space of the next book that I'm writing.
この課題はですね、実は上層部、経営陣のレベルでも起こりがちなんですね。つまり、ある事業部長が他の事業部長の状況をあまり理解していない。つまり、事業部下のことをあまり理解していないということなんです。そういう時に、事業部長同士集まってお互いどういうプレッシャーを感じているのか。そして、チームとしてそのレベルでどうやってやっていくのか、協力をしていくのかということを考えていくという重要性につながっていくんです。今、私、実は別の本を書いていて、これがその、いわゆる上位管理職者の感じているところにもスポットを当てているんですけども、結局、チーム間のみならず、部署間というところでも、この課題があります。
Thank you, and looking forward for that new book, Ben.
Thank you.
あ、イーストです。質問一人いるんですが、質問してもいいですか？
いいですよ。
日本語ですいません。貴重な講演ありがとうございました。最後の方にあったリチーミングのこの検討状態をチームメンバーで共有して、チームメンバーのオーナーシップをこう持っていくという話はもう非常にそうだなと思いまして、ぜひやりたいなと思いました。私の組織では3ヶ月に1回ぐらい簡単な軽いリチーミングをずっと繰り返しているんですけど、その様子をこうミロにはいつもこう書いていて、みんなが見れる状態にはしてはいるものの、検討見れる状態にはしてるんですけど、何かこうアナウンスとかはしたことがなかったので、これからは今こう検討中なので、意見があったらくださいっていうようなことをこうチームメンバーにも言いたいなと思いました。で、その他そのオーナーシップを持つというところで何かこういいアイデアがあればぜひ聞かせていただきたいなと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Excuse my question in Japanese. Thank you for an invaluable presentation. And toward the end of your presentation regarding checking in on reteaming and the health of the teams, taking ownership among teams, I hope I got that right. Just wanted to note that I'm working on this kind of thing in my organization in a way of reteaming every 3 months. It's relatively transparent on Miro, what's happening, but we hadn't actually gone further to do active announcements or solicitation for active input. I think what I'd like to go forward with is to let people know when things are in play and what's being considered for the near future, and then at the same time ask for input from others. And I wondered if there's anything else you might add in terms of taking more ownership on this matter.
I think it's wonderful if you do a write-up of what you're doing so you could share it with others as a case study, because it sounds very inspiring and I'm curious to learn more. I think a lot of this is learning, right? So have retrospectives about what you're learning as a team and share out what you're learning because it might inspire others, even if you decide to change and do it differently later.
Okay. 今おやりになっていることをぜひ広く共有してほしいなと今すごく思いました。事例として一度もしかしたら、まとめ上げてですね、言ったら良いかもしれません。私はもっと教えてほしいぐらいだと思った内容です。レトロスペクティブで取り上げていってですね、そしてチーム内でいろいろ有益なことが出てきたら、それを外向けに発信することで、その有益性がさらに波及していければというふうにも思った今のご質問です。そして、レトロスペクティブで話し合ってやってみたことも結局、後で変えてもいいんですよね。で、変えた時にもこういうふうに変えましたということで、どんどんそういう発信していくことによって、そのオーナーシップという面がさらに育まれていくのではないでしょうか。
ありがとうございます。はい、いろいろこうチームで試してぜひ発信していきたいなと思います。Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I definitely want to keep trying things at the level of my team. In that way, I'll be able to then, as you say, hopefully evangelize more what we succeed on, and then we can share more. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
質問、今日はどうも、ご縁ありがとうございます。ちょっとテスターというか QA の立場からで興味あることがあったので、ちょっと質問したいと思います。で、テスターっていうのは、 アジャイルになって、こう、大きく、やっぱ変わって、前は、その QA 組織とかいうのがあって、別々の組織だったんですけど、それがアジャイルになると、ホールチームになってやっていく。それがうまくいってるところと、こう、うまくいかなくて、こう、入り込もうとしても、なんだろうな、アボイドされてしまう。こう、何しに来るんだよ、みたいな。こういう組織上で、こう、本当はホールチームになっていきたいんだけれども、それがなかなかいかない場合もある。こういった場合、ちょっとその5つのパターンとはちょっと違うような気がするんですけど、これもリチーミングをトライしてると思うんですけど、こういった場合、どういうふうに考えていったらいいのかというところをなんかサジェストしていただけるとありがたいです。
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation today. I'd like to ask a question from the perspective of quality assurance and as a tester. With Agile being introduced, there have been large changes in this part of the organizational role. The so-called QA organization used to be separate, but now with Agile, we're part of the whole team. So this works well, and it doesn't work so well. Sometimes we seem to be the target of avoidance. People don't want to essentially want us around. It's like, why are you here? So we obviously want to figure out what to do about this attitude. And so when it's not working out so well, clearly the reteaming comes into play. However, what we're up against doesn't seem to fit into any of the 5 patterns you described today, at least on first blush. So I just wanted to know if you could perhaps supplement your presentation and maybe suggest a little bit more, or if you have any specific how-to advice for me, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So in my experience with quality assurance, when you go through a change like that, working with product managers, engineers, others on what they call shifting left, working more on writing acceptance criteria, working on story refinement and early in the process can provide new helpful ways to contribute to a team. So efforts to do that are very important, and there are books by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory that I would suggest reading. Agile testing, is that what it's called?
Yes. Thank you.
すいません、通訳が入ります。私の経験になりますけども、QA について、組織変更があった場合ですね、やはりこのプロダクトマネージャーやエンジニアなどを交えてですね、このいわゆるシフトレフト、左に寄るっていうところにおいて変わっていくところ、例えば受け入れ条件について、あるいはストーリーのリファインメントについて前倒しにやっていくところが非常に重要な行動ですよね。それをやることによって、QA が最も役に立てるところが、より早く見出せて、うまくそのチームが進めやすくなるかもしれませんので、アジャイルテスティング、すみません、質問の方、十分ご存知だと思うんですけども、ジャネット・グレゴリー、リーサ・クリスピンの著書ですね。こちらの方も参考になるかというふうに答えが出ていますけれども、どうぞ。
なかなか、それをトライしようとしてるんですけど、心理的にこう、うまく、こう、なんだろうかな、コントリビューション、お互いのコントリビューションができてないところだったので、もう一度それをトライしてみます。はい、ありがとうございました。
Thank you so much. In fact, we have been making attempts along the lines you've described, but there's been this psychological barrier for some reason where the mutual efforts to contribute had been challenging. But I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going back and I'll try again.
There's one more thing. The book, Creating Intelligent Teams, has an activity called Landswork, and it's from organizational relationship, systems, coaching. The activity is called Land's Work. It's an activity to help build empathy. You can do it to build empathy between different roles. And since we're both at the same conference, I'm happy to tell you more about it in particular. But that activity can be very powerful to help build empathy across roles. If it's something that your group would be open to. And that book, Creating Intelligent Teams, has step-by-step instructions for how to do the activity. It's a great activity.
著書になりますけども、クリエイティング・インテリジェント・チームスですね。こちらの方にランズワークというエクササイズ、演習があるんですけども、それも手順を追って説明してあります。いろいろな組織体制における関係づくりのコーチングの範囲になってきますけども、私も今、質問の方と同じここにカンファレンス参加しているので、後で個人的にもっとお話ししてもいいのですが、どうやってお互い共感し合っていけるか、そしてその共感の気持ちを強めていけるかということですね。これはいろいろな役割感において、それぞれロールが違うところで育てるというところが重要になっていて、このランズワークというエクササイズが非常に効果を表すことが分かっています。質問の方のグループでもそれが実施できそうであったらおすすめです。
はい。どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
はい。じゃあ、今ので最後の質問をさせていただきたいと思います。ありがとうございます。Thank you so much.
どうも。
ステスさんありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。